Hello, and thank you for joining me today for our Criterion Learning Series presentation. I'm Steve Tompkins with Criterion HCM. Today, I will be showing you workflows and organizational structure or view in Criterion HCM. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to start off here in self-service, just to kind of level set here. As you can see, I'm at the homepage of self-service. I have all my widgets enabled and so forth, so you can kind of see how this works here. Now, what's going to happen, we'll start off with organizational structure because we use those in workflows. If you're not familiar with where those are, we'll go over and show you how to set that up in the settings and also show you where that is configured on the employee. In self-service, the employee is able to see their org structure and where they land. If they go to, it'll open up on me, their employment information here under the employment menu right here. So you can see, I click on employment. They'll have a bunch of other information here, but you'll see right here, manager. This is an example of an organizational structure. I have one called manager. You may have up to 4 on an employment information screen here. The one I'm using today is manager, but I'll show you how you can add others. Perhaps I wanted to add a supervisor or a team leader or something like that. So I can add those right there. Now this will also drive an org chart. So that could be used obviously for org chart purposes, and you'll need to have this information on the employees to build the org chart, but these also flow into the org chart. So let's go ahead and switch over to the admin screen to show you where this is located. So I'm going to go to the employment information on the employee first before I show you this setup, just so you can see the equivalent screen on the admin side. So I'm looking at employment information, and here you'll see manager. On this screen, of course, I can change it. So there's a couple of things I can do here. One is I can simply clear it out by hitting the little X icon right there, and Ted is no longer the manager. Or I can search for the person I would like to be the manager in there. So perhaps Jesus is going to be the manager. So just like that, I don't need to clear it out first, but I can use this selector to do that. Now, of course, to save that change, I would need to hit save. So that's how that would work right there. All right, so how do you configure those org structures? So let me go ahead, and I'm not going to save those changes. Go ahead and just close this screen here. And I will go over to my settings. So you do need to have access to your settings, the gear in the upper right-hand corner. And to configure them, it's going to be under System Configuration and then Code Tables. All right, so I'll go to Code Tables here. I do need to change the type of code table to user. And then the table name is going to be org structure. Okay. And here you can see, here's the one that I have configured on that employee. It simply says manager, and it is org structure number 1. I'll open this up so you can kind of see how that works here. Not a huge amount of settings here, but you'll see there the code, the description. You can do the description in different languages. So if you needed to put it in other languages, and then the number that it's going to be. So in this situation is organizational structure number 1. This one is active, which means we're going to be using it. And you can see how that works there. Now, if I wanted to add a second one, very simple to do that. Simply click on add here, and perhaps I wanted to do supervisor. And I'll make that number 2. All right, so really easy to do that. I can have up to 4. So very simple to do that. If I go back to that employee now, go ahead and click on Chris here, and I come to this screen. There you go. You can see supervisor is now here. Now, of course, what it does not do is populate that. When I add it, it doesn't populate that. So there's a couple of ways to do that. One is I could come in here and individually select the supervisor like this. So perhaps Megan is his supervisor, just like that. All right, and then I can go ahead and save that change, and that would just save it on one employee. Now, I also have the ability to import this information. So I'm not going to go into an extreme level of detail on here because it would probably take up the rest of our time today to go over an import. But if I go to data import, it is one of the things that I can import under my core, my module number 1 here, core, is organizational structure. And you'll see here, I can choose import. Now, what you would do is you would generate a template. In that template, you would have your employees. There's going to be a column for, in my situation, manager, and another one for a supervisor. And I can populate that with the information from my system there. What I would suggest is if you are going to do this, you can reach out to support and they'll be able to help you out a little bit more than I can do here in the time for this training. But this will be used for that. You can do that. The other thing I would do is, of course, bring it into the sandbox to make sure that you do it right. You don't want to accidentally set everybody's supervisor to the same person. That's not really what you wanted to do. So let's make sure that you do that correctly. I always recommend importing into the sandbox if you're ever going to do it. And of course, our support can be there to help you. But the simplest way, again, is to just go to the employee records and update them. All right. So now where does that information go? Of course, I showed you in self-service and on the employee record where that information goes. But one of the primary places, besides what I showed you already, is in the workflows. So what is a workflow? So workflow is if I make a change to something on an employee record, I can have it go to somebody for an approval. So as an example, if I go back to my self-service here, I've got something right here. It says a performance review is ready for me to complete. Now, this is my own, but that could be for somebody else where I'm the manager of that person. And it was sent to me because of that workflow to me to complete it. Or perhaps I need to approve a time off request or a timesheet or something like that as a manager. Now, that's for organization. Now, workflows can be for other things as well. You might have something like benefits enrollment. It doesn't go to their manager for approval. It goes over to somebody in HR, or an address change goes to somebody else. So that's an example of that. It doesn't have to have an organizational structure for workflow, but that's an example of that. So let's look at workflows in the system here. Now, I've already loaded this, but you'll see here where I have under system configuration. So I would click the gear icon in the upper right-hand corner. Again, assuming I have rights to this, you do have at least one system administrator account that will have access to this. And then that system administrator, perhaps support or implementation, helped you set up other accounts that may have access to this. So as I scroll down, the very last one is workflows, and that'll load this screen here. Now, when I first come here, it's going to show every workflow. So it's going to look like this, where it says show inactive, and this is enabled to yes. So you'll see ones that perhaps you're no longer using before, and you might say, well, wait a minute, I know I changed how my address changes work. Why am I still seeing this here twice or something like that? So if you don't want to see inactive ones, you can simply check that box right there or that toggle, and it's only going to show the ones that are currently active. All right. So you'll see all these here. They're just sorted alphabetically in my situation by the name. And I'm just going to pick one out so I can show you an existing one, and then I'll show you how to set up a new one. So I happen to have already checked on this one called address change. So I'm going to go back into that one. So I'm just going to click on it. Now, these are done on the employer level. So if you have multiple employers in the system, you will need to set up multiple ones of these. If you have an address change for, let's say, a second employer, you would need to set up a workflow for that employer. All right, so you'll see here, there's the name of it. Now, what we recommend you do for the name is be descriptive in it. So we don't have like a limited number of characters here where you have to just put in 10 characters or something like that. So describe what you're doing here. In this situation, it's an address change in the HR module. So we called it address change HR. So kind of makes sense as far as what that name is called. If you just call this, workflow one, it's not going to be descriptive of what's actually happening here. So we always recommend making that name descriptive of what you're actually doing in this situation. What is the workflow type? So this is a drop-down menu where I can choose what the workflow is going to be controlling. In this situation, is somebody changing the address. And you'll see other ones on here, benefits and goals and taxes and all these other ones that are on here. There's a whole bunch of them. Now, you don't have to set them all up. Perhaps you're not going to allow anybody to go through and update their taxes. So maybe in your security, you say it's view only, and only HR payroll is going to ever do that. And you're not going to have the employee do that here. So you might never set that up. But if you are going to allow people to edit or update or add information, then you're going to want to probably set up a workflow. Otherwise, what will happen is when they do it, it'll automatically be approved. and you may not know that they changed something that might impact their taxes or maybe their address or whatever it happened to be. Okay, so I've chosen address change here. Now the module, this is not always going to have both HR and self-service. There's some things that are self-service only, so you may only see self-service here, but this is a required field. So this is saying if an address change is done in HR, this is the workflow to follow, because I might have a different address change when it's done through self-service than if I have one done through HR. Maybe if it's done through HR, I just want to email somebody. So I might want to have that happen. All right, so I could choose HR or self-service, or if I don't have that option, I might just say self-service here. All right, now what group or groups is this going to apply to? So here are different groups that I have configured in my system. In my situation, I have a group called active employees, which is all of my active employees. We are going to have a training on groups in the future, so we can talk about how those work here. But this is something where I can include people in this group that this would apply to. So I have one, like I said, for all employees, but perhaps there was one where it only applied to, let's say, salaried employees. I don't know why an address change would matter for salaried employees, but maybe that's just how you do things. So you may make a group called salaried employees, and then you add that into here. All right, I'll talk about this in a moment, but let's go over here to the right. So active. So if this is not active, it's not going to follow this workflow. So you want to make sure it's active. And then is multiple approved? What that's going to do is if I set up an approval down here by a job or a position, it would mean everybody in that position needs to approve it before it actually gets approved. And then confirmation text. So what happens is when I do an address change in this situation, there is a default prompt that'll come up when I go to save it. This will allow me to have a different prompt than the default one. So you may want to say, before this is approved, please upload or present a copy of a phone bill. I don't know. You might have some message you want to say to them or something like that, maybe on a timesheet. Do you confirm that there are no injuries or accidents, all your time is true and correct. That might be your message that you want to show, and that's what will go in the confirmation text box here. All right, now these two fields are not here by default, and I'll show you that in a moment when I create a new one. So, but what this allows you to do is you can say, all right, if he does not approve it, I can have it auto approve or auto decline or reject it after a certain amount of time. So that's what auto action is for here. That's what those two fields are. I want to talk about those. Let's look at the steps down here. So when you first create one, you're going to have a step for the initiator. That's the one who's actually doing the particular task right here. So the person doing the address change, they're initiating it. And so they're going to submit that change. So that's going to be always step one. Now, step two and so forth can be multiple things. In this situation, it's going to TED for approval. And TED is an employee and not a particular job. So what I did is when I came in here, I said I want this performer to be an employee. And you'll see I have other options here, including org type, which we were just discussing there is like the manager or supervisor. Position. So I can say this is going to go to the person that's in the HR generalist position. All right. And then position workflow, that is on the position screen. You may say that for this particular job, let's say electrician, the workflow one employee is this employee, Joe Smith over here. So anything for an electrician is going to go to Joe Smith for workflow one, and then workflow two, maybe it's somebody else, it's Barbara, I don't know. I can't come up with it right now. Barbara Smith. Okay, so it goes to Barbara Smith in workflow two. So that's where you can assign that on the position itself, not using the org chart. And then finally, project org type. So on projects, you can set up an org structure as well. That's where you can use that. So that's what all 6 of these are for. In my situation here, I have to go into an employee. When I choose employee, when I choose employee, I have to select somebody. So in this situation, I selected Ted. Now I could select somebody else and it would go to that person, whoever it is. So if I selected Eleanor, it would go to Eleanor. All right, so that's if I'm doing an approval. Now, I can have notification. So notification would be a message that goes out in the self-service or an email, perhaps a text message. So that could be that. The notification could be right after submitting. It could be after approval. It could be anywhere I want. You'll see here on the right side, I've got these arrows to move it up or down. So if I want to notify before approval, I can do that, or notify after approval, just like that. So there we go. I've got those two. Now I can do other things on a workflow. For an example, perhaps Ted is very busy and I want this to escalate to somebody else after a certain amount of time to go ahead and do the approval for Ted because he's just so busy. If it sits in a desk too long, somebody else needs to do it. So I can say, let's go ahead and escalate it to a different employee or different person instead. So perhaps I want to go to that org type called manager and the level. So what does level mean? So we have different levels of manager. My direct manager would be level 1. My manager's manager would be level 2, and so forth up the org chart until you got to the final, final boss, the CEO, the owner, whoever it was at the top there. It might be, that's 3 or 4 levels up. You would have to know just based off your org chart. It's not something that we determine for you, but eventually you will reach the top of the hill there. So let's say I wanted to go to my direct manager if Ted can't get it done within 3 days or something like that. So when I do an escalation, it's going to add the number of days right here. So this is something new that was not here before I added escalation. So what I'm going to say is, let's go ahead and escalate it after 3 days to go to whoever is in the manager level 1 field. And then that person would then do it. All right. Now, you'll notice that it put the notification still right here. So I might want to move that down. And that's fine. I can do that. I can add other notifications as well. If I needed to notify like 5 different people, I could do that. You'll see here where I can choose the same option for notification here. So if I wanted to add somebody else to notify, I can come in here, choose another notification and another employee. And let's go ahead and let's say that right here. Okay, so now it's going to notify Chris and then Marshall in that situation. All right, so that is setting up a workflow in here. The auto action, what this does is if, let's say I did not have an escalation, I could say after a certain number of days, let's go ahead and either approve or reject it. So I might say after 7 days, approve or reject it. Now, what would happen in this situation is after 3 days, it would go right here from Ted to the manager. And then after 7 days, it would go and be automatically approved. If I don't do an auto action, it'll just sit there on this person's inbox or in their inbox in the system until they actually get around to it. Now, I do have some other options in here that let's talk about those. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. Now, one of the things I could do is, let's say Ted's on vacation or the manager's on vacation and they need to delegate their approvals to somebody else. They in self-service can come into self-service right here, click on the little gear and delegate their approvals to another person. So here you can see I actually have one that's older. So think of it as like an out of office, all right? So I can say start date and I could go to today or something like that. Well, let's just say he's going to take off the 31st and he's going to be coming back on, let's say Tuesday right there. So what will happen is anything that is in his inbox or that comes in during this period is going to be delegated to Ted. All right, so if I save that, that's what's going to happen. Now, let's say he forgets, but HR knows that's what he wants to do. HR can come into his record and set a delegation under miscellaneous. You'll see delegation where I can set it. So this is already set, but let's say he forgot, he can do that right there. All right, so somebody in HR can come in here and set this up. Or if I'm the manager, I can set the delegation for somebody. So Chris forgets, Chris's manager is Ted. He can come out and you'll see team delegation. He can set the delegation for somebody on his team. So if I logged in as Ted, I could do this to Chris. I can say, all right, I have a delegation from Chris to somebody else. Now, Chris is seeing all these people. So he can come in and say, for Andre, while he's out, I need it to go over to Frederick. All right, and then for that date range. So there's 3 different ways you could do it. The person can do it themselves, their manager or somebody who's a team leader, something like that, where they are in the org structure can do it. Or HR, somebody who has access on the admin side, payroll, HR, an admin user basically can do that delegation. Now, there is a 4th way that a system administrator can do it. And that is if you go in, you can individually delegate a task under this button that says track. All right, I don't have any that are outstanding, but you'll see right here, I can see these different things on here. I would have a little button over here to delegate it. So there's a little silhouette button. Let me see if I have one for a time off request. Perhaps I do. Should have set one up. I apologize about that. Let's see if I have any outstanding ones. Shoot, it looks like they are all filled in. Shoot. All right. So what this allows you to do is you can delegate it to somebody else through here, but this is one approval at a time. So you would not want to do this if Chris was out of town and there were 15 different time off requests for him. You'd want to set the delegation. Unless all 15 go to 15 separate employees, then that's what you would do is you would say, all right, for this one is going to Ted, for the second one is going to Mary, for the third one is going to Barbara. Then you would do it individually. Otherwise, what you can do with the track is you can actually see the history of all the workflow that's using this. So this is the time off request one. And you can see this one here. Oh, actually, this is a great one because so this one's not approved. So Ted is asking for some time off. And I have this little button right here to delegate this from Rebecca to somebody else. So I can come out here and say, let's go ahead and send that over to Chris. You'll notice it said, all right, Rebecca, delegating it to Chris. Chris then needs to approve it. And as an administrator, you can also approve or reject right in here. You can also send it back with this little arrow. So if I am the system administrator and perhaps Rebecca sends me a text message while she's in a meeting saying, yeah, go ahead and approve Ted's request. He just sent it in. I'm talking with him right now. You can do it for him. So go in there, hit the little check, and you'll notice right here, I could put the reason. I could just say, received a text message from Rebecca approving this and submit that. And then it keeps that in the comment. So I have that for an audit purpose. All right, so what does it look like on the HR side? You've probably seen workflows before, but let me just refresh here. I should see the one for the time off request that got delegated to me. And here it is. So here's my time off request for Ted. And I can click on this and I can approve it. It's a little bit older. It's from, I don't know, 6/1. So it's a little old, but that's okay. From a year ago, I probably wouldn't want to approve one from a year ago, but you can see here, I can approve that right there. All right, so let's look at real quick before we have to end today of setting up a brand new one, just so you can kind of see what it looks like when it's brand new and fresh. When I go in here, when I click add, all of this stuff is blank. Now, what you want to make sure of is if you are setting up a new workflow, you don't want to have 2 workflows for the same thing. So I could not set up another address change workflow in HR for that active employee group because it would say there were 2 workflows that apply in that situation. Our system does check for that. So I'm going to set one up for address changes in self-service versus HR. So that's going to be somebody's doing an address change here rather than an address change in HR. All right, so I'm going to call this back to this tab here, address change self-service. And I'm going to do it for all employees, active employees. So I'm basically going to match. The only thing that's different is that module there. And in this situation, I'm going to say, let's go ahead and this one's just going to go to the manager. So I'm going to use org type and I'm going to choose manager and I'm going to do level 1. All right, and I will save. All right, I know I went through that real quickly, but you'll see here if I go back in, what I did is I put a name in there. What I did is I just copied and pasted this name and I did this here. Of course, I could have typed it, but then I called it self-service. I said for all active employees in self-service, this one is currently active. the initiator, who would be the employee because it's in self-service, is going to do their first part, and then it's going to go to their manager. So how does that look for the employee in self-service? So I'll go over here to my address, and let's just look at his address here. And maybe there's something incorrect here, for perhaps they forgot his apartment number. I could come in here and say he's really in apartment 305. Everything else is all right. Just we're missing the apartment number. So I will submit this for approval. And now you'll see here, it does say highlighted fields were recently changed and are being reviewed. So this one in green is what changed and is being reviewed. His manager, I believe, is Ted. He would get a notification telling him that Chris has submitted an address change. Now, Chris gets one here in self-service, but he would also get one in an email, perhaps a text message letting him know that it was submitted for approval. So Ted would log in, he would come in here, he would approve that or reject it. And then what would happen is Chris would get a notification back letting him know that it was approved or rejected. All right, so I know there's been quite a few questions that have come in the Q&A and in the chat. We're gonna leave that open for a couple more minutes here. I did want to talk about what's coming up in the future here. So let me just switch back over here. And we're gonna talk about what's coming up in our future learning series here. Hopefully you could see this. It's our upcoming Criterion Learning Series webinars. So we have more than this planned, but our next three, we have our time off plans overview, where we're going to look at various types of time off, talk about how they set up, how they work out there. Benefits overview, obviously benefits can be very complex, but we're going to talk about benefit plan setup and some of those things on there with benefit plan setup. And then as we get into October, we're going to talk about the fiscal year end overview. So some of the things you need to do at the end of a fiscal year. Time off as an example is something that might have a fiscal year end, benefits, but then also payroll related things. So those are the three upcoming ones. We do have a quite extensive schedule after that, but those are the next three. Of course, if you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to your support representative, whoever your success manager is. You'll see our phone number there, our email address, help@criterionhcm.com. Of course, if you're working with one of our partners, you can reach out to them as well. You'll have their contact information. I don't have all of our partners' contact information on here, but they'll be your first point of contact. And always in the system, there's that help question mark anywhere in the admin portion that'll give you help on that particular screen. So you can reference that if you have any questions, maybe it's just something quick that's going to be in the help menu. So as I mentioned, we're going to leave the question and answer open for another minute or so. And then if you do have anything else, go ahead and reach out to us. But thank you for your time today. And hopefully we'll see you again in a couple of weeks.